Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us here at the Creative Budgeting Conversation. My name is Karen Krycirik. I'm with Christ Church Cathedral down in Houston, and I'm here with Cynthia, who is a professor at Wake Forest University. Still looking for that bio, Cynthia.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I actually teach this stuff to young adults. How about that?
Awesome. There you go. So she's going to join us today to talk to us about creative budgeting in the time of COVID, knowing that we're using lots of creativity in various ways throughout the church in trying to adjust to an environment such as this. And budgeting is also one of those ways where we can think creatively, because what we budgeted for 2020 is not going to be the same as what 2021 looks like. And then 2022 is something else completely. So, Cynthia, we're happy that you're here with us today. And why don't we just go ahead and let you get started. And then, folks, as she's talking, go ahead and put some questions in the chat feature. We will answer questions in the chat later on after she finishes the presentation. So anything you have throughout the presentation, go ahead and put it in the chat. We'll keep track of it, and we'll have Q&A a little bit later. So, Cynthia?
Sounds good. So good morning or afternoon. I think most people are in the US, so I'm thinking this is all good morning to everyone. My name is Cynthia Tessien. I am a professor right now in the business school at Wake Forest, but just so you know, I'm not a trained teacher. Actually, I have no training in how to teach, so this may or may not go well for you. I hope it goes well for you and you get something out of it, but my experience really is in business, and I have had a long career doing a lot of different things in business. I've been involved in financial capacities as a CFO and in other roles for companies. I have been an entrepreneur. I've done a number of things like that. And within the business school, I do teach a course called Managerial Accounting, and one of the components of that course is budgeting. So my colleague Matthew Phillips volunteered me to do this, and I'm happy to come in and give it a go. So I have got, maybe it says 9 slides. Don't worry, one of those is a title and one of those says questions. So really 7 slides. And what I tried to do with those is just to try to walk a mile in your shoes and think about what's important. And as I did that, to kind of think about how I've been listening around me to companies I'm involved with, companies that maybe friends of mine run, how Wake Forest is doing things, just to bring a few thoughts to the table. And I also asked for some input, and Karen nicely sent me that last week, and I tried to incorporate that as well. So I'm going to go through it, but I'm going to pause and just ask Karen to just jump in and say, hey, hush with the slides, let's talk, and we'll do that. I am not going to be reading the chat, because then I won't be able to focus on what I'm doing. So feel free to say whatever you want in the chat, because I won't be seeing it. Like, whew, why did they pay for her to teach? Okay,
I've got the chat covered. We're good.
Awesome. You've got the chat covered. So let's see if I can share the screen correctly. I can share the screen correctly. And if I can make it go. All right, are we good?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so this is the title that Joe gave me, Budgeting in the Midst of Uncertainty. And I'm like, yeah, you think? This is pretty bad. And kind of where I start with, it seems impossible. It really does seem impossible. And at more than one time this year, I have thought to myself, when I've been working with different organizations and even our own, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. And I think it's okay to kind of allow yourself to say, this is really hard. We are not going to get it right. We've never gotten a budget perfect. We are not going to get this one perfect. But I think what's really important and what your parishes need is your parishes need your best effort. And so one of the risks that I know that I fight against is I get kind of overloaded with all the uncertainty. I don't know where to start. I don't even know how to think about it. And I think actually that's probably your biggest risk, is either just saying I can't do anything, or since I don't know, I'm just going to default to what we've done in the past. And I don't think either of those serve you well. Let me just stop and before I get any further, let me give a caveat that most of my yoga teachers always give. right?
Mhm.
What's important for you in budgeting is to figure out what's right for you.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that is. I'm going to talk in hopes that something I say will spur you to go, aha, and write something down and you have an idea that you might use. But just like in yoga, if it hurts, if it's not right for you, just ignore it. Okay. So now let's get back to this. All right. So I do think a key risk is inaction. You really do need to figure out what you're going to do. But I also wanted to raise, I also think a key risk is running out of cash. And if you have not been hyperactively focused on conserving cash, I'm going to suggest to you that it's worth your consideration. So I'll talk about that more in a minute. All right. So one size has never fit all. So that doesn't mean like one type of budget across parishes, but it means really one budget for the year. So it's always been hard to budget for a whole year. I actually think it's impossible to budget for a whole year right now, because if COVID has taught us anything, it's that we have no clue what's going to happen this afternoon. And it could have a massive change in how we operate. And so to think that we have any chance of understanding what the whole year looks like is kind of crazy. So budgets are important for planning and control, but I kind of get you to let yourself off the hook of trying to get it right, because that's sort of in our DNA, because that's why we ended up in the jobs that we're in. And we kind of have to let that go. And that's terrifying, but we kind of have to let that go. All right, so what do I do? You know, you're telling me all those things, what do I do? Make lists, brainstorm, work with the right people, figure out what's a good idea, throw away the bad ideas, but at the end of the day, do something. That's the first thing. Second thing, improving your flexibility, which has to do with having cash, reducing fixed obligations. That is always a good idea, and I would imagine you would rarely be sorry that you did that. All right, let me pause before I start talking about cash. Anything we need to chat about before I start talking about cash a little bit more?
No, I just want to reiterate like your thoughts on being flexible. I feel like most parishes end up revising their annual budget at least 2, 3, 4 times throughout the year, depending on cash flow, how contributions come in, all of those things. And so that's a good practice, but it's something that we maybe have already been doing, but to do it more intentionally and more frequently in the year to come is definitely, just go into the year thinking and knowing that the revisions are going to come with a greater frequency or with better timing than maybe, rather than doing it as you need to, but doing it intentionally, routinely.
I totally agree with that and totally support that. And you're going to hear me advocate for probably everybody having at least 2 budgets. Yeah. And I would literally be watching, every 2 weeks, every month would be the longest I would go without looking at the budget to say, where are we operating right now? What's appropriate for right now? I don't think you can budget a quarter at a time. We just don't know enough to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to go to cash?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. All right. So, cash, here's what I would say. Christ is king, but the game is over if we run out of cash. So cash flow is kind of king of this game right here. We have got to preserve cash or the mission is over. We have nothing to do. Okay. So I think it's really important for you guys to consider having a split personality while you go through this work. Oh, there go my dogs. Having a split personality. Okay. So on one hand, you need to set an example as you are hyperactively managing cash to preserve as much as possible, which could mean paying attention, literally, we call it, retaining the paper clips that come in the mail. You need to set that kind of example. On the other hand, you can't micromanage every single line item. You can't, you don't have time. So you've got to figure out what are the items, I'm guessing 3, 5, 7 at the most, that are the real key items that you've got to manage that make the biggest difference. So you've kind of got to do both. Now, while you're modeling this cash conservation that I'm going to suggest to you, you've got to get everybody in the game with you to preserve as much cash as possible. And so one thing that I'm drawing from Wake Forest that they did, I think has had tremendously strong impact. And they have us ask a question of ourselves before we incur any expense over the amount of a fraction of a penny. I'm not kidding you. If we spend a penny, it has to go all the way up in the organization. And the question that we have to answer is we're supposed to keep on our computers a picture of a coworker that we have that we really enjoy working with. And the compelling question is, on the day that we have to let that person go, are you glad you spent this money? Okay. On the day we have to let that person go, are you glad we spent this money? And what they're trying to convey to us is that this is a long game.
Yeah.
This is not a short game. And we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know who's going to win the election, what the tax code is going to be, what donors are going to do because of, charitable deductions. We don't know. We don't know anything, right?
Yeah.
And the game is over if we run out of cash. So how can you consider some way to find a compelling question that you can share among your colleagues that gets everyone in the mindset of conserving every penny?
Yeah. So to make really intentional decisions, because also even spending small amounts can really add up over time. And so it's not just, the big ticket items. It's not just the things that are going to cost you several thousands of dollars. It's literally the little hundreds of dollars that can add up over time.
They really can, because the other thing that happens is if you go in with the mindset that $100 is a big deal, we are really going to agonize over spending $100, then people will be more careful about even asking about spending whatever else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
All right. So everybody knows that some churches, some universities, some organizations, all that have these tempting endowment funds or these board or vestry appropriated funds that we could pull. And the question is, well, why not just pull those instead of cutting our expenses? And I think that is very, very tempting. And I'm not saying that I would never do that, but I would go a long way before I would even entertain that conversation. And the reason is twofold. One is we don't know how long we're going to be in this game the way it is. We do not know how long this is going to last. We don't know if this is a 3-month game or a 3-year game, right? We don't know. And the other is we don't know what normal is on the other side. We don't know. And where there is that much uncertainty, do you really want to give up that bedrock that could keep you in the game down the road?
Yeah. I think it's going to be different. It'll be different for everyone.
Right.
And the budgeting portion will help people figure that out. Right. And also posing that same compelling question, not just to your staff, but to the endowment board as well, so that they can be clear about if the funds are needed, how do we meet that compelling question criteria in order to justify that spending? Is it just a operations need? Is it a staff person need? Is it a programming need? Is it an audiovisual need? And then how would you answer that same compelling question with the board of the endowment fund to justify using those funds in that way?
Absolutely. What we're really talking about here is having very sharp pencils, very sharp pencils before any money gets spent. Because if we're going to spend money, we want to make triple sure that it is the thing, not the 20 things, the thing that's going to have the impact that we need right now. Just a final point down there, it is unlikely that you would overshoot this mark. You almost never would look back and say, we saved too much money. I think it is possible. I've never seen a group of people accomplish it.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, we have too much cash.
Yeah, we have too much cash. How many times do we say that? And if we do have too much cash, holy cow, how many needs are there that we can really operate on in the community if we have that? I think of it as dry powder to put toward an initiative.
Yeah. I also do want to be conscious of, the fact, I know one question for us is, making sure that we use 2020 contributions, things that were committed to the annual fund for the year of 2020. And this, you'll get to some of this stuff later on in your slides, I know, but, from the donor perspective, they're intended for use in this calendar year. So also be aware of the cash preservation, but the expected intention of the donor when spending. So don't anticipate closing off your annual fund contributions for 2020 to sort of safeguard them for 2021, knowing that donor intention does factor into the use of those cash funds.
Absolutely. And I would also say this would be the kind of situation where it could be appropriate. You may want to consider even going back to some of your donors, and that might be where you choose some of the larger donors so you don't have to have as many conversations. Sure. But going back and saying, the world is different than when you made this pledge, and let us talk to you about what would be really helpful to us in terms of flexibility. And organizations may have already approached you with those kinds of questions. I know some of the charitable organizations we support personally have approached us with, hey, COVID has caused us to pivot, and this is what we really need. And I think in every case, we felt like they had a well thought out argument, and we said, yes, we agree.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't hesitate to do that if the circumstances are right to make that play.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so this is impossible. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't have a silver bullet, but we still need something for planning and control. And I alluded to this earlier. If there was ever a time that I thought it was worth it to have more than one budget, I think it's now. I really do. I think it's now. You might, do 2 or 3 or 4 scenarios. That sort of makes my brain shut down if I start to have too many scenarios like that. So I was trying to think, what's a reasonable middle ground, and what are we doing in a couple places in our personal lives? Kind of how are we doing it? I'll tell you what Wake Forest is doing. Wake Forest is delaying doing their budget and then doing very short-term budgets, very sequential short-term budgets. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea for you. So I was trying to come up with something else, and I thought, maybe two is not awful. And I don't know if your systems, would account for 2 budgets in your accounting systems, however you do them, but you could always put one in the system and have one that's on an Excel workbook, that has some assumptions in it or whatever. So I was trying to think, base case, if you had to say, if we're going to sort of hope for the best, but plan for the worst, thinking that from that we can expand to what we want if we get better than the worst, what might the worst look like? And so I'm brainstorming this. I don't know what the worst might look like, but it might be something like today's operating environment, meaning we know what the rules are for having hand sanitizer and what level of cleaning and all that stuff that we didn't know back in March, right? So we didn't have those costs back in March because we didn't know what to do. Yeah. But now we've got all these rules, whoever's rules that you have to follow. So maybe adding those costs in, and think about the winter coming and all of that, and the restrictions that we had. So not the events, not the fees that we can get in, not the things we could get in maybe from some of the people that share our campus. So if you kind of had the base case that's sort of a really awful, sucky situation, this is kind of it, but here's how we would hunker down and survive the winter. And then here's where we'd like to start taking steps towards something that's a new normal. So if the numbers can come down, and if we start to get a vaccine and we can start to open up a little bit more, then maybe we can do A, B, and C. Mm-hmm. So that was my thought, is maybe this is a year for two things. I know that someone asked a question about zero-based budgeting, and I love the concept behind zero-based budgeting. I think it's exactly right. It's exactly right for the situation. But in my experience, when I'm working with a whole bunch of people whose brains shut down whenever accounting people start talking, or you use the B budget word and their brain shuts down and they freeze up and they're like, oh, but I have to have this, right? A lot of people really struggle with that, right? So the one idea I had is maybe hook that to that compelling question you come up with about cash management. Because if there's ever a time not to have a new curriculum in Christian ed, it might be this year. You know, if we're going to do Vacation Bible School, or however you guys, you know, whatever it is that you're planning for in the summer, maybe we don't buy the fancy new curriculum and we do something different. But just be aware of that. And then I'm going to talk out of the other side of my mouth, which is that all of this planning, I think, could be understood by your rector and your clergy. I think it can be understood by your vestry, at least your hopefully senior warden. But I think it's a really muddy stewardship picture that actually wouldn't do you any benefits on stewardship. I think on stewardship, that might benefit from less change from last year to this year rather than more change. Right. Maybe it's a number that looks more like the old number did, that says, yes, we have less of this, but we've had a whole lot more of that, and we're trying to manage to the same number. Mm-hmm. And so you don't get the messaging convoluted between what we're trying to do to preserve the mission and to figure out how much we can spend tomorrow, and the stewardship that we're trying to keep on a faith-based basis.
Yeah. And I think, to speak to that note, Cynthia, one thing, I think it's really important to be fully transparent, and I believe most churches are, with your congregation about how much of your budget their contributions make up. And when they understand that, that is how you can help them, you know, educate them as to why keeping pledges at the same amount or even increasing really benefits. So I'll just give the example of Christ Church Cathedral. Almost 2/3 of our annual budget comes from parishioner pledges and contributions. And we have other revenue streams and then endowment distribution that helps buoy the remaining portion of the budget. But we've always told them this piece, you know, it's always been this way. We tell them how much of the budget comes from parishioner pledges, but we're using the EMC or the Evermember Canvas this year to kind of hone in on that these other revenue streams, which we'll talk about later, are zeroing out. They're not bringing in funds the way they were. And so the fact that 2/3 of the annual budget comes from parishioner contributions and pledges really makes an impact to being able to do business. And that's why we're keeping it at the same level that it was. The asking level is the same, because it's more important than ever. So
it really is. There's no question about it. Okay, keep going.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was trying to walk a mile in your shoes and thinking about, all right, what would I do? And I think one of the challenges is that you guys are all working with parishes that have history, right? You know, you have history, you've got a way of operating and all of that. And so I just wanted to offer to you that entrepreneurs budget in an environment where they don't have any history. They have no idea. And they know that there's no way that they can see a year out. You know, they're just trying to figure out what to do today. And so they really focus on assumptions, and we focus on assumptions too. There'll be things like, you know, salary increases are 2.5%, or health insurance is going up 4%, or whatever. But with them, it's really, really, really important what their assumptions are. And they expect, this is probably the difference from your world, they expect to change those assumptions very regularly. You know, an every 2 week or every month review of the budget, like we were talking about, you know, might work for you guys. They would never go that long. They would never go 2 weeks without looking at their assumptions.
Oh, wow.
because the world is changing constantly. So there's a tool that I've used in my own experience, and I've also used one of the great privileges of teaching in the Wake Forest Business School is I have some students who are entrepreneurs, and I get to help them with their business plans and help them launch their businesses, and that's lots of fun.
Yeah.
So one tool that's been helpful is called discovery-driven planning, and in discovery-driven planning, you'll do your budget, and you're trying to make sure with every line item that you understand how the cost behaves. Is it a fixed cost with a commitment over X time? You know, is it a fixed cost that's more discretionary? Is it a variable cost? What does it vary with? And you're really trying to nail your assumptions as to what that is based on, what is behind the number. And then the question you ask, the discovery-driven question that you ask yourself is, if I'm wrong, if I am completely wrong and it's double what I think it is, what happens? And what you're trying to figure out is, where's the stuff that really matters? And what's more on the margin where I don't have to worry about it? Kind of like the paper clips, right? We're still going to model, you know, saving every paper clip because we want people acting that way. But we know we're trying to figure out what really matters the most. And I'm assuming in most of your parishes, it's people and buildings, right? But
Yeah.
within people and buildings, where are the keys, right? Where are the keys that you've really got to be all on top of? And that's going to be different for everybody. So the example that I wanted to give is a company called PS as in postscript or problem solved, PS Snacks. And they have a line, Nikki Azera, who has founded that company, they have a line of healthy snacks. They're in Whole Foods, maybe in 2 or 3 of the regions around the country. And she's getting this business up and running. But they've got these little packaged refrigerated snacks, and the snacks are really kind of an edible cookie dough that you don't have to cook. It's safe to eat, it's gluten-free, it's all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So as she was looking at her business, what she figured out is that she had to manage the heck out of chickpeas, and that chickpeas were just going to drive everything. And the lemon juice that you need to put in it that acts as a preservative, she could be actually, it could be 5 times higher, and it wouldn't matter because she didn't use that much lemon juice. The cane sugar, she didn't use that much cane sugar, it doesn't matter. But the chickpeas, she better be all over sourcing chickpeas. And so that really drove her work. She can't manage everything at that level, but she can manage a few things.
Yeah.
So what are your chickpeas, right? What are your chickpeas? And I would encourage you, I mean, people and buildings, right? You got to start there, but you got to go deeper, right? Where within the people, where within the buildings, or whatever else it is in your particular situation. And then I said 3 or 5 or 7. I don't know what the right number is, but you can't actively work on and manage, or I can't, a dozen things at once. I might have a dozen on my list, but I'm gonna have the top 3, and I'm gonna try to make progress on those 3, and then I'll start working on the next 3, and then I'll start working on the next 3. But I can't do 12 things at once. If you can, please message me and tell me how.
That's a whole other webinar, Cynthia. Like a totally
good, excellent. I look forward to signing up.
How to do more and how to clone yourself. That's, you know, we're working on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I think that even starting small, right? Just focusing on 3 to learn your technique, and then maybe growing, and then teaching that skill set to your staff too, so that they can help monitor different areas. So I know for us, things that we're looking at very closely are audiovisual technician costs. You know, the more we try to do with live streaming, the more AV tech help we need, or the more production costs that come in. And so as we're learning what the costs are for those different types of projects, how can we find balance in there, knowing ahead of time what's it going to cost us to quote unquote produce Christmas, right? If it's got to be all virtual, if it's got to be all pre-recorded, if it is going to be in person, what do those costs look like, and how do we understand what December is going to be budget wise? Similarly, the cost of printing, right? I'm not printing service leaflets at the same rate that we were printing 8 months ago. We didn't have to print Easter leaflets at all. Like,
Right.
that was honestly, that was $8,000 in savings. So, honing in on not just those things that can fluctuate in costs, but what would fluctuate in costs if your in-person or online worship model changes? Because
Right.
those are going to differ. If you do move from an online only to an in-person, know that some of those costs are going to fluctuate. Where you've seen savings before, those will bump up, and then try to understand what's that the lowest amount you can get away with spending in order to make that feasible. So
I agree with that so much. And as I was thinking about the kind of two budgets for this coming year, I was really thinking, one budget is pretty much all virtual,
yeah.
And one budget might be the trying to move toward the new normal. Although I will say, from my perspective as a university professor, and also everything I'm reading and everything I'm kind of thinking about, and you're reading stuff and thinking about stuff too, I'm not sure we're ever going to go back to the way it was.
Yeah.
So some of what we've been able to do in terms of putting, book clubs or Christian education or whatever online, I bet some of that stays.
Oh, sure. We are anticipating that some of it will. And I also think that, from a conversation with church leadership, if you have those two budget options, what does online only look like, and what does in-person, add cost-wise in regards to disinfecting, in regards to printing, in regards to supplies, in regards to hourly staff? You can present those two budgets, and, while obviously the work of God, is at the forefront, if staying online is the thing that conserves the budget to where you can survive, that can be an important part of the conversation with leadership, who, with all the full information, can make the right decision for the congregation.
Absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
A few of the questions that I got were about renegotiating contracts. And I think that this is an excellent time to think about renegotiating contracts. And especially if they fall into that bucket of they're the ones that'll move the needle, so to speak, then I think that you do. If you've got some debt to refinance, this is probably a pretty good time to do that. If you've got the credit worthiness and history and good relationship with your banker, that's pretty good. But other than that, I would be thinking pretty short duration, especially if you need to go to somebody and ask for some concessions. Then, people I think are more willing to give some short duration concessions right now, but I would not be signing any long-term agreements. And for me right now, 6 months honestly is long-term. I can't see it. I'd have to be convinced that in both the base case and the up case, and with my compelling question on cash, this still has to be done and it has to be in there. And then I might try to do the best I can. But I guess I would still ask myself the question, if I were negotiating this in February of 2020, how would I have done it? And in April of 2020, would I have been glad?
Yeah.
And then maybe I would do that. A specific question was about campus clients. And is it appropriate to try to renegotiate with them to try to pass along some costs to them? I think absolutely it is. This is costing everybody more. Everybody needs to bear a share of that. But I would try to figure out on those campus clients, are they draining or are they thriving? And I might either be a little more aggressive or a little more moderate in how I approach it based on what's happening in their world. And their world could look quite different. And then if you need concessions, can you trade something? Can you give them access to space, or do you have a person that's not as busy because you're not in person all the time? It's a staff, but you need to keep them on for good reasons, but they've got some time and they could help do something in return for, getting some cash in. So just kind of, I would say on renegotiating contracts, yes, be careful how long you commit and try to look for a win-win from the other side too. Because I haven't met a company yet that is in the same spot they were in before.
Sure.
Everybody's either way more on this side or way more on that side. And this side over here that's hurting, there's a lot more people on that side than on this side that, we can't keep up with all the work.
Yeah. And I want to just briefly kind of mention what the term campus, because this was my question, and the term, what campus client means. So there's some campuses that have multiple entities that use their space throughout the week. So for us, there's a restaurant that operates during the lunch hour, Monday through Friday. There's an on-site preschool. We have a parking garage, and we share space with two other nonprofits. And so things like the phone bill and the trash pickup, that's all split between people at different percentages. And so potentially renegotiating those as needs arise. And Cynthia, like you said, considering where are they in their situation, and are there ways that you can work together? I'll say from our perspective, the restaurant closed for several months. And so what we did with them is we have allowed them to catch up on the missed rent in increments, and we didn't charge them for the months that they were not required to pay during the months that they weren't open. But once they were open for a full 4 weeks, we've asked that they, in increments as they can, pay on the missed rent since they weren't actually operating. And then we didn't obviously charge them for trash pickup and other type of elements during that time. So just an example.
I think that's a great example and makes lots and lots of sense. It might have been your question as well about asking for concessions from municipalities or utilities and others like that. If it's a big enough deal to be worth your time, you could consider asking for concessions. My instinct would be to ask sooner rather than later, because I think a lot of cities and utilities are hurting more than they realize. And I think as we go on into this and they start to understand more and more the added costs that they have, things will get tighter and tighter at a city and municipality level, as well as a utility level.
For sure. And you can see costs rise as they understand the hurt that they're encountering. I know it takes them longer to kind of do that evaluation. And so even come 2021, you could see some costs go up there based on the fact that they're trying to make up for lost ground. So
I think that's right. I think they're going to play catch up. And that's where, if it takes the broader economy, if you listen to Chair Powell or others from the Fed, if it takes the broader economy till 2023 or 2024 to be back on track, I don't think municipalities will get it done that quickly, because I think they're going to play catch up.
Yeah.
So are we in this for 5 years? Maybe.
Probably, yeah.
Ugh, let's move on from that thought. Okay, prepaying expenses or subscriptions. I don't know if this question came because of needing to use 2020 contributions, but maybe it did. But if you're thinking about prepaying something, I would be wanting a pretty good size discount to be prepaying something. And I would also want to make sure that it passes your compelling question that you still want to actually spend it. So anything that's a subscription or something like that, I would be challenging first, do you even need to do that right now? And if you do, and it follows your compelling question and you want to prepay it, I'd be looking for some concessions from them to get that to happen. If you've got 2020 contributions that you need to spend, I would really strongly encourage you to go back to some of your larger donors and see if you can get some flexibility around that, so that you are being able to be maybe more measured in how you spend those funds towards something that works for a longer view. Delaying expenses to the future. Oh, if you can do it and not have a penalty, I am all for that. I am absolutely all for that. Should we think creatively about campus maintenance budgets? Yes. And I just started, putting out stuff that I would be asking questions about. And, you know what makes sense, but I would be like, how Spartan can we run these things that we are not using while still keeping these, in many cases, in my case, in both the churches, both the parishes that we're in, historic, ancient, leaky buildings, keeping them intact and safe.
Without jeopardizing the structure itself.
Without jeopardizing, I'd be doing everything I could without jeopardizing the structure. If we've always had Christian education up here and we're doing our Zoom broadcast over here and this person's office is over here, I'd be going, it costs more money to heat the upstairs. We're all going to be in the basement. This is where we're going. It's like, come on, gang, we got to do this here.
Yeah. Or reducing the number of hours that people can be on campus so that you don't have to heat or cool the building as long. And you definitely don't want to neglect those things because that can actually cost you more in the long run by turning it off completely.
Right. You don't want to do that.
I've heard examples of folks who weren't allowed into their church building literally for months from a parish administrator standpoint. That made my heart skip a beat. Like, oh my gosh, you have to make sure that things aren't leaking and that toilets get flushed and faucets get run and the HVAC keeps going, and all of that stuff can have longer term, more expensive effects. So yeah, also evaluating that too. Does spending the money on preventative maintenance also help with the end goal, the long term goal of cash conservation? Is it easier to set up work out a deal with your plumbing company or your electrical company and say, can you guys just come once a month? And then that's that one day handle all, we develop the list in between visits, and that one time you give us 4 hours and you tackle that list, and that is ultimately less expensive than the repeated service calls throughout the month, and trying to work out with those types of vendors opportunities so that they can still, you can still boost their profits, but also that you're handling your campus in a way that makes a lot of sense strategically from a cash conservation standpoint.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We've been doing a lot of the same thing at my husband owns a little tutoring business, and we cut the air back and all that, but we're walking through it every week and we're making sure everything is okay. And then we walk right back out that door.
Yeah, Cynthia, there was a question that came up in the chat that I feel like maybe would be better answered now than later, is do you have any examples of utility or municipality concessions rather than that would just defer costs, but that could actually suggest forgiveness? Or is it more just trying to lock in a set, like I know here in Houston, you can opt to sort of do a standard monthly payment and then it sort of settles up at one point, but it spreads out what your anticipated costs are over a longer period of time. That's the only thing that comes to my mind necessarily right now. Anything that you've heard of, Cynthia, that could be worth asking about?
No, I haven't heard, and it's going to be a local question, right? Yeah. But it's going to be everybody's municipality is different. So our municipality has some things. So we, within our parish, we have some housing that we are able to provide, and we can get some concessions on that. But no, I'm not aware of like a specific program that would work, across the nation. I wish I were. If I learn of something, I'll let you know.
Got it. Thanks.
Let you know. Okay. Another question that came in: cost benefit of, instead of using a contract company, do I hire an hourly person or some part-time staff? I think this is a great question. It's a great question, and I encourage you to ask it all the time. And I think about it as your business model. Here are the tasks that need to be done. And for these tasks, I need them so much that I'm going to hire a full-time person to do it because I need that all the time. And I don't want to pay somebody else a profit margin, right? I want to have them on staff. But when I do that, I've got the fixed cost and the obligation of having that person on staff. So I have to think about that. Then I have these other things that I only need once in a while. And some of those could be things that in the old life you only needed once in a while. They might have to do with more digital marketing and video conferencing and stuff. And in the new life, you might need them more. And so instead of contracting it, do you want to start to hire somebody? And I don't have one answer for that, because I don't think there is one answer for that. But I would encourage you to look at your buckets of work and to say, okay, all these buckets of work that we have full-time people for, do we still have all that work that we need all those people? You probably don't, right? We certainly don't. At Wake Forest is a great example. We've got lots of hospitality people, lots of cleaning people, so we just don't need them anymore. So we don't need that work anymore, but there's this other work that needs to be done. And sometimes there's not a match, but sometimes there is a match. And so repurposing your staff to do some of that other stuff, I think is great. Can you train them? You know, can you hire somebody? Do you have somebody that you can get part-time, or do you need to go to a contractor? I think about it as a whole spectrum. I really do. And I look at it and I try to figure out what's my lowest cost per unit of work is the way that I think about it. If I'm not convinced that I need that work long-term, I probably am going to hire up a little bit to get a contractor or a part-time person, and maybe have to pay a little bit more on an hourly rate, so I don't have to commit to another full-time person that I'm not sure that I want to make a long-term commitment to right now.
Yeah. And I also think building this same conversation into your routine reviews of the budget, right? Like, let's look at what we're spending on a contractor to run the audiovisual equipment every Sunday, you know, and what we're spending versus, you know, this, just always keeping that as part of the conversation, not just saying that 2021, this is the staff we're going to have and this is what we're going to spend. But if you're finding that you're spending more and more of your money on outside production resources or outside audiovisual help, can you either retrain someone who's already kind of got a knack for that and maybe rewrite their job description and cut down on some of those additional expenses? Or is it time to maybe, you know, make a shift in what role is contract versus what role is covered under full-time hire?
Absolutely. And this is back again to PS Snacks and the chickpeas and the edible cookie dough. She could use incubator staff, or she could hire her own staff. That she paid a little bit more per hour for the incubator staff, but she only had to pay for the hour of work that she used. Versus when you start hiring people, you've got to pay them enough for them to come and work for you and not for somebody else. You've got to deal with the turnover and the training and all of that. So I like how you were talking about that with the AV staff, because some of that is going to be technical. Some of that perhaps is technical more on the side of setting it up. And once you have it set up, can you train somebody else to run it? And it's kind of like you being a thought leader in areas, but then you can get other people to do the work or to follow up on it. Yeah. And again, I don't have one answer, because it's never to me one question. It's a question I ask all the time. Yep.
And be careful around contract agreements. Not so much contract agreements, but when you hire contractors, the way that they're supposed to work with you or required to work with you are just different. Like, they can, in a sense, set some of their own hours. They don't have to do it depending on how your contractor agreement is negotiated. You could actually set yourself up to be more in their hands rather than them working with you specifically. And so just being aware of that too, that if your needs start to be outside the times in which they've agreed to work with you specifically, is that an internal scheduling issue that we need to be more determined to make sure that all the things we need fit into the time frame that we've agreed? Or do we need to either seek out other contractors or evaluate the way in which this position is set up? So.
Absolutely right. I agree. This is why you guys get paid the big bucks, right? Because this is hard. You got to make all those decisions.
Yeah.
All right.
I love making decisions, but I don't know about big bucks. Yeah.
No, true for all of us.
It's not for the money.
It is not for the money.
Thank you, Cynthia. That was awesome. And several folks have asked if we'll share the slides, and I said
yeah.
yes, we'll absolutely make the slides available. This is being recorded, and so the recording will absolutely be shared to the SEEP website also. So we do have a few questions that came up in the chat, Cynthia. It is 10 till, so we've got a few minutes to address these questions. And so for anyone who's on here, if you have to have a hard stop at the top of the hour, please feel free to jump off. We will stick around a few extra minutes, Cynthia and I, if there's more questions that are lingering in the chat. So don't hesitate. Don't think that time is the constraint. If you've got questions, go ahead and put them in there, and we can stick around a few minutes longer to make sure that we try to answer all of them. So one of the questions that came up was cash conservation, or during the part about cash conservation, and the concern is that 67% of the expense are staff salary and benefits, and another 10% are mandated contributions to the diocese. Yeah. How do you conserve a remaining 23%? Yeah. That is a really tough question. I think part of the answer is what we were just talking about, looking at staff allocations. What are they working on? How can they be retrained? How can they be repurposed in ways that can help save some costs, maybe in other areas? I know, and I think someone else mentioned it in the chat, I know here in the Diocese of Texas, the diocese has agreed to refund those annual costs, or those annual contributions, and they've sort of evaluated that quarterly throughout the year based on how the COVID situation has developed. That may not be an option in every diocese because every circumstance is different. Cynthia, what else would you consider, or maybe have ideas around creative ways of, other than paper clips? Like, I'm totally on board with paperclip conservation.
Yeah, but it only gets you so far. So I'm not going to add any different comments or any different topics. I just want to touch on and expand on a couple of the ones that you've already identified, because you're absolutely on the right track. You know, the first thing is to say, okay, those staff expenses, and for whoever said that's 67% of your budget, I'm not surprised, right? I look at the mission that we're in, right? I'm not surprised. So for the diocese tax, sorry, that probably wasn't the right thing for me to call it. But for the diocese support that we're all happy to do, I do think it's appropriate to ask your rector or your vestry, whoever the right person is, I don't know what the right politics are, if there is a conversation that can be had about the amount of that or something, because these are extraordinary times. So I would absolutely, franchise fee, thank you, I would absolutely do that. On the staff side, I would totally look at your staff as a pool of talent. These are human beings that are willing to work for the church. And I'm just going to give you an example from Wake Forest. So I'm an accounting professor, and I am and I don't teach in the summer, and I am teaching in the summer and in the fall, and I'm teaching stuff that's not accounting. And I've done that because they've asked us all to say, hey, can you come and cover something that you normally wouldn't cover because these are extraordinary times? And I'm like, you know what? I'm a team player. I'll come cover that. A friend of mine runs part of the maintenance division at Wake Forest, and normally there's a bunch of stuff that they outsource, painting and just stuff that's just like really menial stuff. And these are engineers and technicians and stuff. They're doing it. They've done it all. They have done it all. They hadn't paid one penny for anything. They are all in there getting it done. Now, I don't know, if this is happy news, not happy news, whatever, anything like that, but at least at Wake Forest, no salary increases, no hiring. There's discussion as to whether the retirement contributions are getting ready to go. They haven't taken them yet, but they've said those are next, those are next. They have talked to some people about retiring, going ahead and retiring to ask them to come off the payroll. That's in the process of happening right now. There's like research stipends and honorariums and stuff that happen. Those are all gone. Travel's all gone. Conferences are all gone. Subscriptions are all gone. Student helpers are all gone. It's just all that stuff, which is basically just saying, hey, look, we're paying for y'all. Y'all are the full-time core, and here's this big mission, and we need y'all to get this whole mission done. Who's in for what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's absolutely.
Who wants to learn AV broadcasting, whatever.
And one of the benefits is that now everything is digital. So even training can be virtual, a few hours out of the workday, a couple of classes online. Now, granted, it's not the end of all problems, but if that's the difference, if $150 in training is the difference between having somebody run a system and then having to go outsourced for it. We've done the same thing. We've done all kinds of campus maintenance with sort of in-house staff, or we've done a lot of AV training, cross AV training for our folks. So I think that's absolutely, we're in it for you and for conserving the budget to make sure that everyone can keep their jobs. And so how can you pitch in? What are you interested in? Or what special skills do we not know you have, right?
Or that you want to learn.
Right. Yeah.
And I do think you just did it. I do think this is where linking that compelling question to the ask is really important, because I mean, they came to us and they said, look, we're trying not to lay people off. We are going to have to lay people off at some point. It is going to happen. We're trying not to do it. We're trying to do it as little as possible. Here's all the stuff that needs to be done. Who's in for what? Yeah. And so it's linked.
Someone actually made a comment in the chat that says encouraging donated services from parishioners is a good idea to help cut costs.
Good idea.
We have business owners who have trimmed our trees, saving thousands of dollars, running our audio visual, doing electrical work, donating AC repair, etc. People are really glad to help out. And I think that's also something really to keep in mind. I know for us and for, churchgoers across the country, not being able to volunteer is a huge morale hit. Yes. And so anything that they can do to help, physically, is the best pastoral care we can give them. We're in the middle of our stewardship campaign and we ask for testimonials, and that is not an easy thing to ask for ever. And I have gotten a lot more yeses than I ever have before, because folks are just like, I'll do whatever it takes. Just tell me what you need me to do. And I think that's a really great thought.
I love that. That is a fabulous idea, because what we're all grieving, right? What we've all lost here is our connection to community, and we're all striving to try to create community and to still be part of our community. That's a great idea.
There was a question in here. I'll kind of condense it. So there's one parish that let's see. We're in a slightly different boat than some others in that 100% of our annual budget comes from plate and pledge income. In order to keep cash on hand, we sweep unspent funds to a savings account, rainy day fund, at the end of each year. Thus, we are in good shape savings-wise. We would like to consider covering a small part of the anticipated shortfall for our 2021 budget with some of this rainy day fund. Is there a recommended percentage of rainy day type savings that is standard for this type of annual budget coverage? I'm thinking either a percentage of the budget or a percentage of the savings.
I don't know. I've never thought about that. Is there something that's standard? So one of the businesses that we have, that my husband and I have, is a seasonal business. And we know when our drought is going to be. It's going to be from June to about September 20th. And so I know what it's going to cost me to run bare bones from June to September 20th. And I need that. And I want an extra, cushion of X. And that's how much I need. And if I have more than that, I could pull it. So mine is really more based on forecasted expenses.
Yeah.
I never thought about it the other way, though. That's an interesting question.
I think we're evaluating, what is the stopgap that we need for this year, and then for, this year or next year. And then also setting some parameters around making additional decisions for that stopgap, knowing it's a one-time thing, or knowing it's a special ask. But going into that conversation, setting parameters around how will we make changes, right? We will only make changes if such and such circumstances continue, just so that we don't get into our minds that's a well we can continuously go to without consequence.
Yeah, exactly. Smart.
Yeah. So it's 10:59. I want to be good stewards of everybody's time. So thanks everyone. We're going to stick on maybe just a few more minutes, Cynthia. There's a couple extra questions that have come in that I'd love to sort of talk about. But thanks to everybody who's joined us today. Again, the slides will be available as well as the recording of the webinar that you can either watch us again or share with others who maybe couldn't make it today at 11 o'clock. And we've thanked everyone who's been supporting the CEAP network. The CEAP has been doing a great job in providing all types of webinars to folks or with folks from all different scenarios to kind of keep us not only connected to one another, but engaged in conversation throughout the past 7 months and going forward. Let's see. So if you need to jump off, go ahead. If you're interested in sticking around just a few more minutes, feel free to keep throwing some questions in the chat.
If you're jumping off, let me just say, I'm so thankful that you're in this job that you're in and that you're doing what you're doing and that you care enough about this, that you came and spent an hour with us today. I wish you all the best. I'm praying for you.
And you're doing great, guys. This is no easy thing, and you're doing great.
What your parish most needs is you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see what else is in here, Cynthia. This has been really nice talking to you today.
Likewise.
Someone said, just FYI, ECF recommends that a healthy church budget includes no more than 55 to 60% of the annual budget going to personnel expenses. We've used this recommendation successfully to help keep our personnel expenses under control. I think that's good advice. Not always easy. It also depends on if you inherit a system. Naturally, there's lots of leadership changes that happen, and so it can take a couple years, 2 to 3 cycles worth to be able to get that balanced out if you take on a leadership role in a parish that maybe isn't operating like that. So definitely a good goal to work towards, but maybe not always quickly reachable. Let's see. There is a question about staff cutbacks.
That's one of the hardest questions.
Yep. Sort of there's varying perspectives of, let's see, there's a quote that I've heard, and this is, it's going to sound harsh, but the church is, what is the word? The church is a charity, but working for the church is not charity. And there are decisions that have to be made for the betterness of the business itself in order for the church to stick around. Let's see, one is that the very harsh kind of unchristian thing to do to people during COVID, and the other is that everyone understands why difficult decisions need to be made. I would say that the biggest key here is transparency, is that depending on what the decision is, that you be clear and upfront with the individual as to why the decision is being made, so that it's not, you need to acknowledge the circumstances around COVID, but sometimes job descriptions have to change. And there are pastoral ways to have that conversation. And then there are other things that the church as a network can do for that person. If you have to let somebody go because the job description has changed and they're just not qualified, could you, in your own network of people, help them find a position elsewhere, even if it's part-time, even if it's a different skill set, connecting them with someone else potentially to help with that. I know that some of the hard conversations we've had, there's been the benefit of at least paying for 1 to 2 months of healthcare on the other side of a separation, which in a time of COVID is super, super important. That may not be accessible to everyone, but it is something we've tried to be conscious of when making changes and being as understanding as possible.
Yeah, I think this is one of the hardest decisions always, but in particular in a church environment. I think this is a very, very difficult thing, and especially when you have members of a vestry that are going to have differing points of view about the role of church. I'm a capitalist. I believe that you can succeed in business and serve God, and that leading in a Christian way is important. I have also fired plenty of people, but I think it's how you do it is really important. I think it's important that it truly be necessary. I think that's where all that you do matters. Like if that's the first thing you do, then I don't know. But if you're doing all these things and you're doing this work and you're trying to make it work and you're trying to give people an opportunity to retrain or improve or do different work or whatever, and none of that works, then at some point I think you have a responsibility. This is my opinion, one person's opinion, but I think you have a responsibility to the totality of your parish to be to have the, and sort of, to me, it's kind of an integrity decision that there's not a job here that person's willing to do or able to do. And so a separation has to happen. And at that point, it is all about caring for the person as you go through that separation. It is all about caring for the person. And if that means you pay their COBRA for some period of time, or whatever, especially during COVID, and you work with people to try to find them alternate employment, whatever it is, I think all of that is really, really important. But that wouldn't stop me from making the decisions right for the church. And again, that wouldn't be the first thing I had done. I'd be doing all kinds of things. But when you get to that point, I think my opinion is you're not doing your highest and best for the parish as a whole if you're unwilling to make that decision. Right. My personal opinion.
Yep. And we've actually done we had somebody retire, and we opted to not refill their position and actually use those funds differently. Yep. So evaluating everything both before, either a departure or a termination or a retirement, that, you don't necessarily have to fill the exact same role. How do you modify it? How do you make it creative? And just as an example, we had a housekeeper retire, and she was the one who would work on Sundays, and she would make the coffee and clean the restrooms and do that stuff. And so by the point in which she retired in May, we reevaluated, and we now we have less housekeepers, but we use a contract company to come in and do the disinfection on Sunday, because it's a bigger job and it's a higher need, and a different type of professional service is what we think is safest. And so it's been able to kind of offset that a little bit, which has been good. And then our other housekeepers are happy to not have to work on Sunday. So let's see, it is 11:07. We've got a few more minutes, Cynthia. A narrative budget illustrates the many ministry-driven roles of an individual staff member's role. It shows parishioners how everything is tiered to mission. As an example, how much of the priest's time is dedicated to worship, pastoral care, fellowship, newcomers ministry, administration, etc. It helps to show that in real terms. And I think that's right. Yeah.
I agree. Absolutely. I agree. And I think you made a point earlier about the importance of having your parish understand, how much of the donations coming in, how important that is to the mission. But also on this other side is making sure they understand where the money is going in terms allocation of clergy time, cash expenditures, the whole thing. Helping people understand is critical.
Yeah, it's all about education and numbers, which we were already working on from a stewardship perspective before COVID hit, and now just the tone change. I think in helping people understand makes it, we have seen their support change in a good way, that they're like, oh, I didn't realize you did all those things. And kind of how it all makes sense, what all goes on behind the scenes. And I think what's oddly strange is virtual makes that more apparent, which is different, I think, because before they would come down to the campus, they would sit in a conference room, the staff person would walk in, the program would happen. And then it's kind of like seeing clergy or other folks kind of out in the wild and out of place when you've got them at home and their teenager walks in the background, or the dog barks, or they change locations, and you're seeing them in different environments, you know, kind of brings to life, like, they have the home and they have the family, and you are in that same space with them, and kind of making it more conscious of, oh, they are working at night, or they're working really early in the morning, or they're taking their lunch hour to do this thing. Not that people didn't appreciate it before. I think it just changes the perspective on how much time it does take to actually do the work of the church outside of, you know, regular business hours. That when you're working with people in volunteer roles and in leadership roles, you know, you have to be aware that they're all working or not all, but several are working 9 to 5. And so you
Right.
have to meet the needs of everyone outside of the sort of standard business schedule, and that there's still business being conducted 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, because it is an operation. So
It really is. And that's back to, you know, we're not going back to the old way. We're going to have a new normal eventually, someday, hopefully. And I hope that it will include some of the connection where people have been, you know, it's more acceptable now because we've had no choice, you know, for the dog to bark or, you know, whatever. It's just, you know, we understand things about each other from that perspective, and sort of the social mores of doing business and doing work together have changed. And I hope that never goes back.
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. All right, Cynthia. Well, it is almost 15 after, and so I want to be good steward of your time too. So thank you so much for your time today. It has been lovely talking to you. And I would love to do it again soon, but I think we've successfully given folks things to think about and takeaways from the conversation to really begin crafting budgets for the future, and trying to work towards a new normal and a sustainability that will help keep the church going. So,
Which is what we want. We want this mission to continue. This is important work that you are all doing. I applaud you for coming together to have a conversation about budgeting. I applaud you for that and for your efforts, and wish you all the best.
yeah. Thanks, guys. You're doing great.
You are.
Keep joining us for more SEEP Network webinars, and hope to talk to you all soon. Bye.
Bye.